Welcome back to the Word on Fire Show. I'm Matthew Petrusik, Senior Director of the Word on Fire Institute and the host of the Word on Fire Show. Thank you for joining us. Despite steep declines in church attendance in the United States, a recent Real Clear opinion poll found that over 83% of Americans still believe in miracles. Now, those may be heartening numbers to evangelists hoping to reclaim the culture for Christ, but what specifically are miracles, and what are the grounds for believing in them, especially for non-eyewitnesses? In the Catholic context, who has the authority to deem an event miraculous? And what role, if any, do non-scriptural miracles, that is, miracles that happen after the conclusion of the New Testament, play in Catholic theology? At the more practical level, should Catholics incorporate devotions to church-approved supernatural events like apparitions of the Virgin Mary and post-Ascension appearances of Jesus Christ into their faith life? Today, to discuss the Catholic understanding of miracles and how the miraculous fits within a comprehensive evangelical vision of the life of the Church, is Bishop Robert Barron. Well, welcome back to the studio, Bishop. Before we get into today's topic, which is looking at miracles and the Vatican's new guidelines on how to address purported miraculous activity, what's been going on recently?
Well, a lot of things, but one thing I'm really happy about is our new Chancery office is ready to go, and we're moving in. This is now, I've been bishop here for about 2 years, and from the time I arrived, this has been like a top priority. We moved the headquarters of our diocese from Winona to Rochester, so just not far from where we're sitting right now. And we broke ground just about a year ago, and the building is now up, and it's gorgeous. I love it, and I think it's very uplifting for our whole diocese. And it's a new headquarters with a beautiful chapel, and the back of the chapel is a rose window that looks out on this very busy street in Rochester. So the building itself evangelizes. So we're moving in. The official dedication won't be till September, but really, really pleased about that.
Say a little more about why you think it's so important that a pastoral center, a chancery, would be a beautiful structure.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want it to be just another office building. I think the church should always present itself with a public profile. We're not a private organization. We're not meant to whisper our faith among ourselves. We're meant to proclaim it from the rooftops. And so, yes, it's the official headquarters of the diocese. That's true, but it shouldn't look like a just glass and steel office building. It shouldn't look like just an ordinary secular space. It should always announce Christ, and I think the building does do that.
I drive by it almost every day, dropping our son off at Rhodes High School, and I've really enjoyed seeing it come together. It really is a beautiful structure.
Yeah, good.
So moving into today's topic on the miraculous, in the show's introduction, I cite a recent poll that says that 80% of Americans, which I was surprised by, 80% of Americans still believe in miracles. The same survey also examines belief in aliens and ghosts, sort of mashing them all together. So as we usually do, I think it's important to start with definitions and clarity of concepts. So to start off, let's get some precision on what exactly defines a miracle as a miracle. So first, how is a miracle different from a low probability event? For example, like winning the lottery several times over the course of your lifetime.
Well, first look at the word itself. Miracle comes from ultimately a Latin word mirare, which means to wonder at, to be amazed by. So a miracle is something amazing, but get more precise. It's amazing because it goes beyond the usual causal explanations, that we can't explain this by recourse to physical causality. And then finally, therefore, we ascribe it to God, that God alone is responsible for this wonderful or amazing event that cannot be explained naturally. I think when you bring all those elements together, you have the properly miraculous. So like winning the lottery, you say it's improbable, but it's certainly explicable through natural causality. You might say, wow, that's really something, that's amazing, but it's not outside of the natural, and you wouldn't ascribe it to God necessarily by any means. You'd say, well, no, it's for luck or chance or because of this, that, and the other. So that's how I would distinguish it from simply a low probability event.
Okay, a second distinction. How does a miracle differ from an event that could be considered logically impossible. For example, a 0 being a 1 and a 0 at the same time in the same way.
Right, and that's just kind of silly talk. And the sophomoric claim that, can God make a rock so big that even he can't lift it?
Yeah.
Why is that sophomoric? Because, well, that's just a silly thing. To say a rock so big that God can't lift it is an impossibility, like saying a square circle. So if I say, well, God can't make a square circle, therefore he's limited. Well, no, that just means that God can't make something that can't possibly exist. So that's no limitation upon God. And so I would sharply distinguish that from the miraculous.
You've already touched on this, so we could look at logical impossibilities, but also metaphysical impossibilities. So, God creating a rock so big God can't lift it, or how about God creating another God? You've in the past you've appealed the principle of non-being to help explain why that's not possible. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Well, those are just instances of non-being. We're kind of playing a language game. The language is deceiving us into thinking there's something substantive there. So I can say in words, a rock so big that even God can't lift it, but that doesn't make it something substantial. It's just it's a kind of intellectual illusion, right? That in fact, that's a nothing. So God can do anything. That's true. That's what God's omnipotence means. Because those things we're talking about are no things. They're nothing.
Right. So that establishes what miracles are not. We'll be looking more specifically at what could potentially define a miracle. But let's first look at the condition for the possibility at the metaphysical level, the condition for the possibility for a miracle even to happen, setting aside whether they do happen. So what must be true about reality in order for miraculous events to occur, whether or not they do occur?
Well, let's stay with our definition so that God has to exist. If you take God out of the equation, then the miraculous disappears by definition, because a miracle is something that we ascribe to God's causality. So God's existence is necessary. Furthermore, that God can, even though I'm a little uneasy with that term, but that God can intervene, or God can enter into the natural realm, the ordinary causal nexus, and accomplish something that's remarkable or unusual or attention-getting, right? So that God exists, that God can be operative within nature. I put it maybe broadly this way. In the Bible, the supernatural and the natural interpenetrate. Mm-hmm. See, we've inherited in some ways from the ancient world a very two-story view of reality. There's this world here below that's of kind of Newtonian causality. Everything's kind of fixed and determined. Then there's this supernatural realm, and never the two shall meet. Where in the Bible, they interpenetrate, they're intertwined, if you want, that God is involved in nature. Even as God gives nature its own integrity, he's not alien to nature, and God can be involved in it in this, and I say it a little bit flippantly, but in this attention-getting way. So why would God do something miraculous? Well, just as you and I can have a conversation, but if you're, let's say, in great danger, I might shout to get your attention. I might do something a little bit unusual to warn you or get your attention. So I think in the spiritual order, does God sometimes have to shout or raise his voice or draw attention to something? And he has the freedom to do that. And since nature and supernature interpenetrate in a non-competitive way, he can do it. So I think all those features have to be in place when we talk about the miraculous.
Is your discomfort with the word intervention, is that tied to the idea that we don't want to separate nature and supernature too distinctly?
Yes, and God, as Aquinas says, is in all things by essence, presence, and power, and most intimately so. That's God's normal relationship to the finite world. It's not as though 99% of the time he's completely aloof, and then every once in a while he intervenes dramatically. That's the wrong way to think about it. God is always at work. We would not exist right now. We would not be speaking were God not present to us, sustaining our being. That's why I balk a bit at interventionist language. It's borrowed too much from both ancient metaphysical schemas and modern ones too. Yeah. I want the biblical schema, which is reflected very much in Aquinas, in classical Catholic metaphysics.
Well, if we do, as you just identified, understand as God as intrinsically related to all things at all times, as a principle of being, How then do we distinguish between natural and supernatural phenomena? Is it just a matter of perspective? I mean, in terms of the human perspective and what we're seeing?
Well, to some degree, go back to mirari, right? A miracle is something that we find amazing. So, the great mystics, those who are really attuned to God all the time, are amazed by everything. When you read the great saints and there's an ant crawling across the table, and I see in that, the very presence, which indeed is true, that they're amazed at everything. But for most of us, we do need those wake-up calls. We need a sign. We need a shout, in the land of the deaf, as Flannery O'Connor said. So in a way, I would distinguish that in that manner. It's the mirari element, the amazing element. Now, when you speak of the supernatural, properly you're speaking about God's manner of being, which of course goes beyond finitude and finitude's limitations and all that. So there is a distinction, obviously, but the supernatural and natural interpenetrate.
Seems there's also here embedded within this discussion getting the relationship right between nature and grace. So how does that work out from the basic Catholic theological and metaphysical schema?
Yeah, well, the old principle from Aquinas, gratia supponet et perficiat natura, right? Grace supposes and perfects nature. So grace is not opposed to it. Think of, Karl Barth, representing a Protestant perspective, would say, nature is the crater left behind by the explosion of grace. Well, we repudiate that. We don't think that's right. We think that nature is compromised by sin and so on, but not destroyed. And in fact, what grace does, it doesn't obliterate nature, it lifts it up and perfects it. I've used the image of the burning bush a lot to illustrate that. But the best illustration is the incarnation. We have two natures, divine and human, coming together. So something natural, something supernatural, coming together without mixing, mingling, or confusion, right? One doesn't become the other, but nature is lifted up and perfected and made luminous by grace. That's the Catholic principle. And the miraculous, I'd fit in that category. It doesn't obliterate nature. It elevates it, if you want, and shows a dimension of it. Here's an example, Matt, from the great Augustine, where he says, in his reading of Jesus and the wedding feast at Cana, so do you have a suspension there of the laws of nature? No, Augustine says, you have an intensification of them. Now, what does he mean? He means, well, water becomes wine all the time. It falls down from heaven, goes into the earth, comes up into vines who give rise to grapes. The grapes are picked, and they're crushed, and they're fermented, and it becomes wine. And so water has become wine. It happens all the time in nature. What Jesus did was he intensified that. He expressed it in this hyper intense way. Why? Well, St. John refers to all those as semea, as signs. It's a sign. Not a obliterating of the laws of nature, but a kind of intensification of them for the sake of communicating a sign of his presence. That's, I would say, a very Catholic reading.
It's remarkable the way this comes to mind, not only the kinds of miracles that Jesus performed, but the ways in which he performed them. So the mixing of his saliva with the earth. He works with nature.
Yes. No, it's very important, and not in a sort of magic way.
Yeah, right.
But grace supposing and perfecting nature. And, he doesn't do magic tricks.
That's right.
It's always a kind of enhancing of, or healing of, or raising up of nature. If he were just a sorcerer, and what an amazing, magician he is, or even, it's not just magic, which is an illusion, but what a sorcerer. No, he's the God who created the world and now wants to heal it in every possible way. And that means the moral healing of his teaching. It means the spiritual healing that comes through the cross and resurrection. And it does mean physical healing. So all of those are examples of gratia perficiat natura.
We also have the epistemic question as well. So assuming that miracles are possible and miracles do in fact take place, how do we answer the question, well, how do we know a miracle has taken place? And what role in particular does the trustworthiness of witnesses play?
Well, yeah, I mean, they're always based on witnesses because a miracle has to show up in the world. If I were to say, the Lord through his grace has changed my life, changed my heart, well, terrific, and he does it all the time. But I would not call it a miracle because it doesn't show up in a sort of public, visible way. there has to be something of that showing up quality for it to be mirari, that we wonder at it. So that's the first criterion, is people have to see it. Think of the various apparition stories, from Knock or Lourdes or Guadalupe. Somebody saw something, okay? Now, we begin to apply criteria because, let's face it, people say all kinds of things all the time, many of which are crazy. They're based on misunderstandings or hallucinations or deceptions or who knows what. The devil could be doing something, right? So what does the church do? It applies various criteria. Now, none of them is airtight. Like not one of these criterion is like, oh yeah, that's it. It's kind of a Newman thing. It's a coming together of these different criteria that we say, all right, that's leading me in the direction of accepting the authenticity of it. A negative one would be, well, is there anything in this apparition or this revelation that is opposed to Catholic doctrine, moral or intellectual? If there is, well, that can't be from God, What are the fruits that have followed from it? Think of like Lourdes, most famously, where there was a lot of skepticism of Bernadette when she said, I saw the lady. Didn't even say the Blessed Mother. I saw this lady. Oh, what lady? What are you talking about? Are you crazy? Crazy kid. And that skepticism remained in place for a lot of people, until they began to see the extraordinary fruits of this apparition, and the healings that took place, and then all the people that to this day come to Lourdes. Same with Guadalupe. Guadalupe is followed by this stunning conversion of the Mexican people. So they're often accompanied by these signs that are ratifying, what's been seen. So the church applies these various criteria to try to get an indication.
The secular mind thinks of science and miracles as two irreducibly different categories. So if you're going to believe in one, you can't believe in the other. But say a little bit about how science can actually be used in the service of miracles, or determining miracles, knowing miracles.
No, it's a good question, because I would say that's very old science that would hold to that kind of view. That's very 18th, 19th century science that's locked into this sort of Newtonian vision of things, where you just got an airtight universe that's deterministic and so on. Come on, the quantum world that's opened up to us now, is there so much, call it like flexibility and openness in the way nature seems to operate. Iron laws, not so much, but like statistical probabilities. Very often we're kind of guessing at the positioning of subatomic particles and this sort of thing. Well, read someone like John Polkinghorne, the great Cambridge particle physicist and Anglican priest, who wrote extensively on this, how the quantum world opens up. There's plenty of room, if you want, for the strange and the miraculous and the unpredictable. So I think it's a very old, tired science that would say, oh, no, there's, it's one or the other, and you can't be scientific. No, science is getting weirder and weirder, and that's opening up space, But the second thing I think you're pointing to is, do we have scientists who analyze claims to the miraculous? Think now of healings at Lourdes, or let's say someone's being considered for a canonization and a claim of a miracle. I love this, that the Vatican on purpose has on these commissions non-believers. They have doctors and scientists who do not believe in God. So their prejudice, if anything, is against holding to the miraculous. If and only if it can be determined, again, to the within the realm of reasonable probability, that there's no natural explanation for this. If and only if there's a consensus of these scientists, would the church ever dream of saying, yeah, this is something miraculous? So indeed, we use the sciences all the time to try to, we accept a kind of devil's advocate approach on this, and I think that's really appropriate. Lourdes, to me, is a good example. Most famous healing site maybe in the Christian world, certainly. A relative handful of cases have been determined as miraculous. Lourdes was 1858, so in 170 some years, a handful. The church has said, yeah, that's completely inexplicable. But huge numbers of miraculous claims, they might be miracles, but they determined there wasn't enough evidence to determine it. So I like the church's skepticism on this.
So it's another example of how the church and science are The church sees science as it's entirely complementary and
Right.
certainly not a foe.
Right. If you construe science properly and faith properly,
Yeah.
you don't have the conflict. The trouble comes from misconstruing one or the other, or more likely both. And that's when you have a lot of the really stupid things people say today based on a misconstrual of both. They're caught in an old Newtonian model of science, and they're caught in some, superstitious view of faith.
Related to our previous conversation about Bill Maher, right?
Exactly. Right. Exactly.
So let's move into speaking about miracles as they relate specifically to the Bible. We can make a distinction between miracles that take place in the Bible and the Bible itself as a miracle. How do we understand revelation in its totality and God communicating himself directly to humanity as a kind of miracle, sort of a meta-miracle with all the other miracles take place?
Yeah, okay. I'd be somewhat reluctant because I want to stay within a more constricted view of the miraculous as something wonderful that appears within the sensible realm. But I take your point about the Bible, and it's complicated there, what revelation means. It means kind of a lot, that God can speak in very ordinary ways, as we say, through the intelligibility and beauty of the world. That's a kind of revelation. Call it natural revelation if you want. God speaks through my interiority, my conscience, as Newman said. The aboriginal vicar of Christ in the soul is my conscience, my keen sense of moral principles. God speaks through the received tradition. So this long tradition that gave rise to the Scripture ultimately, well, that's a long account of how people have intuited or sensed or understood the presence of God. And all that constitutes revelation. How does the miraculous fit into that? Well, the Bible's full of miracles, Old Testament and New. Is there kind of an ordinary way in which God is communicating with people? Yeah, through like their liturgy and the temple sacrifice and the words of the prophets, yeah. But are there times when he shouts? Are there times when God, in a remarkable way, again, with the cautions appropriate, intervenes and grabs them by the shoulders to get their attention? Yeah. Look at accounts in the earlier parts of the Bible, contrast them to, for example, 1 and 2 Samuel, when we're talking about the exploits of King David. There's almost nothing in the David cycle of stories that you'd say automatically, oh yeah, that's miraculous. You could read that whole story, through a psychological lens, a political lens, and so on. Nevertheless, God is speaking all the way through it. So let's call it relatively non-miraculous revelation. Other times, God does speak in these miraculous ways. Now, most tellingly, in the New Testament, Jesus performs miracles all the time, right? Miracles of healing, nature miracles. At the heart of our faith is the incarnation. So the miracle of the virgin birth, and then of course the culmination, the miracle of the resurrection.
Right.
So in all of this, we would say God is speaking to us in this remarkable way, precisely through the miraculous. But he also speaks in more ordinary ways. And I think that's good. We shouldn't be univocal about revelation, but we should see this very broad sense of it.
I want to turn to the dicastery for the doctrine of faith, oftentimes referred to as the DDF, new release of new norms on how the church should approach putative supernatural activity, miraculous activity. But before we do, there's sort of a meta-theological question here. We could even say a soteriological question having to do with salvation. And it's this: if God is revealed in the Bible and in and through the teachings of the church, all that we need that's necessary for salvation, what kind of explanation can we offer for saying that God would continue to act in history in miraculous ways? How do we interpret that?
Well, I think that's sort of a Catholic sensibility that yes, indeed, there's the completeness of revelation in one sense in the Scripture. We're not expecting more revelation. Whatever is legitimate in the miraculous would confirm what's already in the Scriptures. If it's opposed to it in any way, we know it's false, right? But I think it's God taking into account human nature and our need sometimes to have our faith aroused and deepened and encouraged. So I don't know quarrel with that. I mean, it's yes, the Bible is where we find the fullness of revelation, but I'm also this person sojourning through space and time and going through ups and downs, and can I benefit maybe at times from a extraordinary reminder Here's something I find when you scratch the surface, you start talking to people, these stories arise like crazy.
Do.
And what I mean is not so much like the hyper dramatic miracle, but the little kind of quiet, odd miracles. The sudden meeting with someone that you had just been thinking about, and suddenly there they are, and just these sort of, call them in a minor sense, extraordinary ways where you get a sense of God's providence, that God is involved in my life. You ask for something in prayer and then it comes to you in the most wonderful way or even unexpected way. I think God's doing that all the time, and then sometimes for the sake of the whole church in a very dramatic way, let's say Guadalupe or Lourdes or something. But there's a lot of little minor Guadalupes and Lourdes in the course of our lives that we say, wow, that's wonderful, that's marvelous, Now, I'm not going to claim the whole church has got to take it seriously. Maybe it's something I just sort of treasure in my own heart. Like, yeah, God found a way to speak to me that really get my attention. To me, that makes perfect sense in light of God's providence.
What's your take on the DDF's new document? Why do you think it was necessary, and what if anything, does it change substantially?
I think I'm no expert. I've read it, and
Sure.
it just came out. My sense is they want to take some of the authority away from the local bishop. So I think in the old dispensation, something happens, it's reported. The bishop, after his own investigation, could say, yes, I believe this is supernatural. The Vatican now is saying, if I understand it correctly, account is given, reports made. The bishop might do a preliminary investigation, but then he has to alert the Vatican. The Vatican then commissions him to do a full-fledged investigation, at the conclusion of which he reports the findings to the Vatican, who then makes the final judgment. And the judgment, again, if I'm reading the document correctly, is not so much, oh yeah, this is supernatural. It's kind of a nihil obstat. Like there's nothing stands in the way of Catholics praying in relation to this event or something. So I think they're trying to be a little more cautious. They don't want the local bishop to jump to a conclusion. And it's a healthy Catholic instinct to say, all right, the claim is made, delighted that it's had an effect on, maybe a small number of people, but we got to be super careful before we say, by God, that's a miracle. So I think it's putting the brakes on that process, maybe.
Let's end by trying to tie the discussion of the miraculous to evangelization more directly.
Yeah.
So first, what advice you have for evangelists in speaking to our Protestant brothers and sisters who really don't take apparitions seriously, who doesn't take certainly miracles by saints seriously? How can we speak to them in a way that's intelligible and fruitful? And also more broadly to a highly skeptical culture, how do we speak about miracles?
There's a book I'm reading, I just got it, called They Flew. And it's by a Yale professor. And it's people like Joseph Cupertino, Teresa of Avila, Thomas Aquinas himself. These reports of levitations and flight and all this weird stuff.
Yeah.
And I've just read the preface to it. But it's part of a postmodern tendency to say, I wonder if our rationalism got the better of us. Mm-hmm. That we got so caught up in rationalism as an ideology. If and only if I can explain it scientifically, it's real. And people are realizing, boy, but there's so much out there. These reports come down to us. Let's say about Joseph Cupertino, who was the famous flying saint, right? There are tons of reports of people that saw him levitating and flying. So what are the options? Well, they're all crazy. That seems a little unlikely. Right? They're all crazy, every single one of them. It's all part of a political, conspiracy. Really, every one of these reports, it's all part of some conspiracy? How about, I don't know, man. It seems weird, but these people said they saw this, And so as I read this professor, I think he's willing to entertain, maybe we should question our own skepticism and say, I don't know, maybe there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamed of in your philosophies, right, as Shakespeare said. So I don't know, I think that's a healthy we retain our skepticism, legitimately, but also let's be skeptical of our skepticism.
And for Protestants who may on principle reject an apparition, independent of the evidence.
Well, that's kind of an offshoot of sola scriptura, I suppose. Once you got the Bible and that's all you need. And well, yes, we would say in a very real sense that Revelation in the official public sense closes with the death of the last apostle. However, who are we to say, well, God can never speak again in any way, or God can never reinforce what he has revealed? Who are we to say that? And as a Catholic, I don't hold to sola scriptura, Just as Aquinas can use Aristotle to illustrate biblical truth, he's never at odds with the Bible. Why couldn't God use extraordinary events sometimes to confirm what he's revealed to us? But why was Joseph Cupertino flying around? I don't know, but it's pretty interesting. I don't know. Why would God have done that? Why did Thomas Aquinas, by several contemporary accounts, after his famous encounter with the Lord, levitate off the ground? And levitation is all over the world in different religious traditions.
Right.
Teresa of Avila, they say, they had to take several big nuns to drag her back down to earth. They're just making that up. They're all crazy. They're all having hallucinations. Don't those seem pretty unlikely as explanations to these accounts? So I think, let's maybe enter into that wild and woolly world that our ancestors bore witness to. And who are we to be so cocky and so sure in our rationalism? So.
Bishop, it's now time for our listener question. Today we have Dan from Georgia asking about whether every instance of disobeying Jesus constitutes a sin.
Hello, Bishop Barron. This is Dan Cole from Johns Creek, Georgia. There are many times in the Bible where Jesus performs a miracle, and then afterwards he tells those individuals to not tell anyone. But in fact, they go and tell everyone about the miracle. Have those individuals disobeyed Jesus's direction and committed a sin? Thank you.
I must say, all my years, I've never heard that question before. Well, and I suppose, yes, disobeying a direct command of Jesus is probably not a good idea. So I suppose in that sense, but I've always had the sense when you read those stories that at some level Jesus really wanted them to tell, It's like a little kid, now don't do this, and it's almost a guarantee they're going to do it. But I suppose, and there is the messianic secret indeed in the Bible, or the New Testament, where Jesus doesn't want people to know he's the Messiah until his death on the cross. So in that sense, he didn't want them to say it. I guess I would say it's a sin, but I maybe find a little room to forgive them for it.
A venial sin?
Maybe it's a venial sin.
Well, thanks so much, Dan, for reaching out to us. If you would like to ask Bishop Barron a question for a future Word on Fire show, please visit askbishopbarron.com. That's askbishopbarron.com, and we'd love to hear from you. We've come to the end again, Bishop.
All right.
Thanks again for
conversation.
Another wonderful conversation.
All right. Thanks, man.
That does it for us today. Thanks for joining us on the Word on Fire show. If you're interested in learning more about how Word on Fire can help you grow closer to Christ, become a better evangelist with and for others, and work for the common good, consider joining the Word on Fire Institute. Check us out at institute.wordonfire.org. That's institute.wordonfire.org. We'll see you next time.